As the United States Navy maintains a massive presence in the Middle East, a disturbing reality is emerging from the shadows of the Persian Gulf. What the American public is being told is a massive pressure blockade is in fact an elaborate act of strategic theater that is draining the national treasure while failing to stop a single drop of Iranian oil from reaching its destination. Good day, everyone. Welcome back to our broadcast. I am your host, Linda, and you're watching The Global Observer. Our top story today pulls back the curtains on the current military operation in the Middle East, a situation that many insiders are describing as the most significant act of mass delusion since the early days of the Vietnam War. Having analyzed the internal mechanics of how power is manufactured in Washington, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the blockade is not what it seems. Let us begin with the brutal mathematics of the naval blockade. To the casual observer, the deployment of the three carrier strikes group sounds like an impenetrable war. However, when you break down the actual operational capacity, the picture collapses. Each strike group carries a handful of escort vessels, destroyers and cruisers capable of interdiction. Once you subtract the massive aircraft carrier themselves, which no commander is going to pull alongside a potentially explosive oil tanker, you are left with approximately 11 ship stacks, with patrolling the vast expanse of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Since April 15, 2026, over 2,000 Iranian vessels have been moving through these waters. The math is simple and devastating. On a day, I mean a good day, the United States is stopping perhaps 10% of Iranian maritime traffic. On average, that number is closer to 3%. The reason for this failure is physics and geography. American captains are keeping their multi-billion-dollar ship at least 200 miles away from the Iranian coast to stay outside the effective range of sophisticated anti-ship missiles. This allows Iranian tankers to simply stay within their own 12-mile territorial limit, a boundary no American vessel will cross without triggering a full-scale war. Consequently, the oil is moving. In fact, it is moving right now. Latest figures indicate that Iran has approximately 150 million barrels of oil already on the open seas, pre-sold to buyers at roughly $140 per barrel. That presents $21 billion in revenue flowing directly into Tehran's coffers, entirely beyond the reach of any blockade. While the Treasury Secretary may talk about having a foot on the throat of the Iranian economy, the reality is that the Iranian economy is breathing just fine. But the farce of the blockade is merely the opening act of a much darker drama. We have now reached day 60 of this conflict, a critical threshold for the world powers resolution. However, as history has shown, this resolution offers no real constraint on presidential power. Administrations frequently reset the clock by declaring a brief pause in hostilities, only to resume 48 hours later. This is precisely what is being contemplated now as the administration eyes a second round of strikes. This move comes despite the professional military judgment of commanders in the region, including Admiral Cooper, who have cancelled that additional airstrikes will not achieve their objectives and will only deplete an already short supply of advanced weaponry. Even more alarming is the accelerated movement of elite special operations forces into the theater. We are seeing the deployment of SEAL Team 6, conventional SEAL units, and elements of Delta Force units that are not typically part of the standard contingency planning for this region. There are whispers of ground operations targeting nuclear materials. When you load the gun to this level, the institutional momentum towards pulling the trigger becomes almost impossible to reverse. The gun is loaded. The question is whether anyone in Washington has the strategic clarity to set it back down. The president has already demonstrated a willingness to override the unanimous counsel of his advisors, as he did during the original strikes on February 28. There is no reason to believe that dynamic has changed. The international dimension adds another layer of peril. Vladimir Putin recently initiated a rare presidential-level phone call to deliver an ambiguous warning. Keep your forces away from Iran. In the halls of power, this warning is often dismissed as a bluff. However, Putin does not initiate such calls without a documented predicate. Russia has positioned itself fully behind Tehran, establishing a record of warning before an escalation they believe is inevitable. This is how great powers behave when they are serious. Yet, the administration continues to view these signals through an ideological lens that treats them as deniable. Furthermore, there is a catastrophic miscalculation regarding the stability of the Iranian leadership, the assumption being passed through liaison channels that the regime is in disarray and on the verge of collapse. This is a fantasy. The men currently leading Iran, the president, the foreign minister, and the IRGC commanders are products of the brutal Iran-Iraq war. They are combat veterans who built the institution out of a crucible and existential threat. They are not paralyzed, they are hardened. Moreover, history teaches us that bombing a population does not fragment it, it unifies it. The strikes have produced a rally around the flag effect, handing the Iranian government a degree of popular legitimacy has not enjoyed in years. Ordinary Iranians, once skeptical of the regime, are now standing in support of their government as a rational response to external attack. Finally, we must address the staggering economic cost. The official Pentagon figure for this operation is $28 billion, but informed estimates put the real number closer to $50 billion. We have lost at least 49 aircraft, and the national debt has hit $39 trillion, accelerating by $1 trillion in just the first 77 days of 2020. This is not abstract. It is hitting American households today. In Florida, gas prices have jumped 40 cents in just 3 days. The strategic petroleum reserve is being drained, yet filling a tank that cost $21 months ago now costs over $50. Iran chooses to escalate to a second tier of targets regional energy corridors and oil's infrastructure. We are no longer talking about a recession. We are talking about a global depression. The interconnectedness of the global energy market means that if the Strait of Hormuz goes, the global economy falls. Geography and physics dictate that Iran remains in effective control of the choke point regardless of what happens in the air. The United States cannot win this war in a military sense because the scale and strategic depth of Iran make it an impossible target for conventional composure. The blockade is a multi-billion-dollar mask for a failing strategy, and the cost of maintaining this delusion is rising every single day. Thank you for watching The Global Observer. Keep an eye out for more.